that I stole the wine, didn't you, Runt?
No, I didn't, I swear!
Let me see what I can do to squeal it.
I did, I swear!
Fine!
I am the Space Quest historian. Everyone knows about Ripper, right? That FMV adventure game by Take-Two Interactive that had Christopher Walken in it, hamming shit up in a way that was unfucking believable. It's been covered by pretty much every adventure gamer YouTuber under the sun, so it's fair to say it's been done to death by this point. There's nothing I could add to a retrospective video about Ripper that hasn't already been said by a million others, and let's be honest, no one can top Spoonie's deep dive into that game anyway, so what would be the point? But you know what doesn't get talked about enough? The game Take-Two did after Ripper. If you thought Ripper was an ambitious but flawed game, which it was, wait until you feast your eyes on Black Dahlia. And yeah, I realize I'm probably saying that wrong because everyone says Dahlia, not Dahlia. It's probably a second language thing, but I've been calling this thing Black Dahlia my entire life, and it's gonna take some serious mental gymnastics for me to suddenly switch up the pronunciation, so I'm just gonna keep calling it Black Dahlia, and you're just gonna have to live with it. So anyway, yeah, this game is bonkers. Most people seem to write it off as a period drama, and unfortunately that's also how the game was marketed, which is a real shame because it is so much more than that. It is truly unhinged in so many ways. This game is like Gabriel Knight on crack, but set in the 1940s, and yeah, I'll get into all of that in a minute, but first, let's talk for a moment about what you actually got when you took this bad boy home in 1998, because the pure insanity of this game starts right when you open the box. You know how FMV games in the 90s came on a lot of CD-ROMs? Because, yeah, it turns out that if you try to cram a shitload of video into a game, but the most advanced optical media you have at your disposal is a disc with only 650 megabytes of available space, you're gonna need a lot of discs. The Seventh Guest came on 2 discs, Under a Killing Moon, 4 discs, Gabriel Knight 2, The Beast Within, 6 discs. You may have heard that Phantasmagoria came on 7 discs and thought that was the most bloated FMV game of all time, and you wouldn't be wrong, because 7 discs is just fucking mental, but Phantasmagoria is still tied with X-Files the game for number of discs. But Black Dahlia takes the cake because it came on a whopping 8 fucking discs. 8! At this point, any PC gamer would be begging for DVD technology to get off its ass and birth into the world, but Black Dahlia came out in 1998, and the DVD format was only introduced in North America a year earlier, so yeah, DVD-ROMs existed, but they were so absurdly expensive, and they required additional periphery in the form of a dedicated onboard MPEG decoder card that was just as likely to fry your computer as they were to display anything meaningful on screen, so it was really unfeasible for major publishers to bank on that technology just yet. There's probably a Technology Connections video about this shit somewhere, but we gotta move on because there is a lot of ground to cover with this game. Let's begin with the story, which starts out simply enough, and yes, I'm gonna spoil the whole plot of the game for you now because that's what I do, and if you don't want to spoil for you, then blah blah, fuck off somewhere else, you know the drill by now. You play as Jim Pearson, a young green government agent for the COI in the 1940s who, at the start of the game, has just been transferred to Cleveland, Ohio in search of action and adventure, only to find himself saddled with picking up the slack from one of the former agents, Walter Penske. Now, Penske got sent to the loony bin because he started babbling about Norse gods and ritual sacrifice, and no one wants to deal with that shit when there's good old Nazis to be punched. So your commanding officer, William Sullivan, who incidentally seems to unpredictably oscillate between being paternally protective and whipping your ass like daddy's on his 5th beer and you forgot to put your dishes in the sink, is hoping you won't suffer the same fate and likewise go over the deep end. Which Pearson then almost immediately does.
Just like a Fed. Asleep on the job.
Emotional damage!
At first, Pearson is sent to investigate a fairly humdrum case about a factory boss, Crazy Eyes Hank Finster here, who thinks he's been handed some Nazi propaganda by a random stranger. This was back in the days when Americans were encouraged to squeal on their neighbors and complete randos about being Nazi sympathizers to the government, and the COI was the agency that was supposed to look into the validity of those accusations. So Pearson is here to see if Finster may indeed be onto some Nazi conspiracy going on in Cleveland, or if he's just another lunatic who loves attention. Well, as it turns out, he's both. The invitation points to a secret society known as the Brotherhood of Thule, and they are indeed into some weird shit. Though not overtly Nazi, they're definitely up to some sinister shit of the occult variety. Turns out they're all descendants of an old sect of Germanic knights who plan to resurrect the ancient Norse god Odin, you know, the one-eyed dude with the ravens, in order to usurp his all-seeing powers and use them to, you guessed it,
take on the world.
Only trouble is, they're a bit shit at it. The reason why they wanted Finster to be part of the Brotherhood was because his family was also descendants of the sect of Germanic knights, but Finster didn't know anything about that part of his heritage, and he wasn't having any of their shit, so he told the dude who gave him the invitation to hop it. That guy turns out to be this greasy fuck, Louis Fichterwald, aka Louis the Fish, a small-time ex-mobster who agrees to spill the beans to Pearson, only to end up getting Gwyneth Paltrow before he can reveal anything useful. Now, Louis was the messenger of the Brotherhood, that was his official title, and the rest of his cabal of Teutonic chuckleheads regularly meet up at this swanky club called the Raven Room to, I don't know, sit around, have a brandy, and chant spooky shit in Latin in between stroking each other's business acumens, I suppose. They're not exactly getting a whole lot of shit done, except for this man, an old dude with a cane named Dr. Eisenstadt, who goes around carving up random hobos and poor people with his butcher's knife and leaving them scattered around Cleveland neatly wrapped up in newspapers like fine deli meat. What this seemingly extracurricular activity of his has to do with the Brotherhood isn't revealed until much later in the game, but what's really interesting about this whole subplot with the Torso Killer is that it's actually based on a real-world case, the Cleveland Torso Murderer, a famously unsolved string of murders from 1934 to 1938. The real Torso Murderer racked up at least 12 victims before disappearing into the ether and was never officially caught, and the game uses this real-world serial murder case as a springboard to tie into its fantastical supernatural plot. The game does fudge the timeline a bit, as the story starts out in 1941, a few years after the real killings had stopped, but this was probably done so the events of the Torso murders would coincide with other historical events that occurred during the game. We'll get to those in due time. Anyway, very long story short, Pearson crosses paths with a hard-boiled city detective named Merillo, who's also based on the real-life detective by the same name who handled the real-life Torso murders investigation, and a slimy FBI agent named Winslow, who is based on every smug bag of pond scum you've ever met. Pearson soon learns that his investigation into this merry band of rope-wearing weirdos is connected to the Torso murders, and after a fair bit of convincing, teams up with Merillo to put this happy old fart behind bars. But since Pearson is now starting to have these weird tripped-out daydreams where the old man bursts out of interdimensional doors and starts tickling his forehead with a walking stick, his credibility and sanity is understandably questioned as he goes from being a sensible skeptic to full-on crystal-clutching superstitious lunatic in record time, fueled by the borderline incoherent ramblings of his predecessor Walter Penske, played by Dennis Hopper in a 5-minute cameo that somehow earned him top billing, and a beaded curtain psychic named Madame Cassandra, played by Terry Garr, who, despite turning in one of the worst performances in the game by constantly reading off cue cards off screen and visibly not giving a shit, somehow received second top billing. Meanwhile, back in the real world, things aren't exactly lumbering down the smooth tracks of justice because Merillo's efforts to solve the murder spree are being cock-blocked by Winning Smile Winslow here, stalling the investigation, withholding evidence, and courting press attention like a street hooker courting potential clients. Despite all these seemingly insurmountable roadblocks, Pearson comes out on top when he stumbles upon the secret lair of the Torso Killer after discovering Dr. Eisenstadt waddling his way into a sewer tunnel and pursuing him by navigating through an infuriating maze of grimy fecal-smeared tunnels, effectively solving the case for everyone while they were all bickering like teenagers on 4chan, and oh, well, that sucks. So, was this guy even the Torso Killer, or just some poor geriatric German fart who got framed for the grisly chop jobs that terrorized the city of Cleveland? Well, yes and no. It turns out that everyone is after this magical trinket called the Black Dahlia, a seemingly innocuous piece of decorative jewelry that's instrumental in summoning the Grey God of Asgard, old blind boy himself, which Dr. Eisenstadt was carrying around with him on the end of his cane, but upon the discovery of his unconvincingly photoshopped murder, Pearson realizes to to his horror that it is now mysteriously missing. Eventually, Pearson tracks down the gem's whereabouts 4 years later in an underground Nazi hideout hidden behind no less than 4 devious logic puzzles, only to have it snatched away literally 30 seconds later by an overzealous MP, and thus setting him off on another year-long search that sees him pissing around an infuriating catacomb maze in full Indiana Jones cosplay, which yields absolutely no worthwhile results other than discovering that Winslow is in fact the main bad guy who also wants to find the Black Dahlia so he can
Take on the world.
But he also has no fucking idea where it went, so it's off on a race to Los Angeles to track down this fucking thing, and good fucking lord, this game is so long.
One eternity later.
As it turns out, after the Dahlia was rudely snatched from Pearson's hands in the Nazi ruins, some army dude sold it on the black market and it wound up in the hands of some other army dude who, not realizing how valuable it was, sent it off to his girlfriend, Elizabeth Short, another character who's also based on a real-life person. The real Elizabeth Short was the victim in a particularly gruesome unsolved murder case in 1947, and the press nicknamed her the Black Dahlia on account of her penchant for wearing all black, which I guess makes her the first goth icon predating Sushi and the Banshees by 3 decades. But in this game, she's still alive and well and hitting the sauce like she's trying to pickle her own liver until she very much isn't. And Pearson gets blamed for the murder, even though the culprit was quite obviously Winslow, who has now gone fully off the deep end in his pursuit of this triangular trinket and is slashing up people left and right and having a merry old time doing it. Now, Big Boy Odin needs a sacrifice of 9 men and women in order to show up because nothing says benevolent deity like a pile of brutally mangled corpses, as well as 3 ritual items, 2 of which are already in the hands of this gleeful little chucklefuck, and the third and most crucial one being this fucking gem that nobody seems to be able to keep in their possession for more than 5 minutes before punting it off to another unlucky soul. Seriously, this thing gets passed around more often than a frustrated housewife at a swingers orgy. Along the way, Pearson meets Alice, a would-be actress with a heart of gold and a hairstyle so tightly wound that her scalp must be bleeding, on the train to Los Angeles. Even though her character is so undercooked it would send Gordon Ramsay into a foaming frenzy, she and Pearson develop an almost perfunctory romance despite only sharing about 15 minutes of screen time with each other, in a game that has over 4 hours of video, mind you. After what seems like an eternity of roundabouts and unnecessarily cruel logic puzzles, the gem finally finds its way into the hands of Winslow the Wacky Wunderkind, and he kidnaps Pearson's token love interest and brings her to his underground lair. Here, for some reason, he impersonates her hanging from the ceiling, and after Pearson cuts him/her down, he then Shang Tsungs into himself before bringing out the real Alice and having her inexplicably blow her brains out just to fuck with Pearson some more. This is one of the most baffling moments of the game because it basically boils the whole romantic subplot, which already felt shoehorned in with all the care and precision of a drunken circumcision, to a last-minute emotional payoff that, despite the best efforts of lead actor Darren Elliker, lands about as effectively as a toddler shot out of a cannon. Oh, Alice, we hardly knew you, and that's why we don't give a shit. Anyway, after a quick wardrobe change, Winslow is now in full black ritual mode with all 3 magical trinkets in hand, doing his best Hamlet impression and pretending to sip from a cup of dry ice before jamming his fist into his head and tearing out his own eyeball, ready to summon the ruler of Asgard and yoink away his powers. But for some reason he allowed Pearson to keep that gun that Alice perforated her skull with, which gives Pearson the opportunity to destroy the Dahlia with a quick bullet and thus putting a stop to the ritual. Now Winslow is understandably a bit upset at this turn of events, but good old Odin is like, fuck you bitch, and cock slaps him into the depth of Hades. You're then rewarded for your troubles by being hauled off to the electric chair. Seriously, this is the good ending. Told you this game was bad shit. What really sells the story, though, is the quality of acting on display. While it doesn't have the Hollywood star-powered allure of Ripper, it more than makes up for that by having actors that actually know what they're doing and look like they're having a good time doing it. Look, everyone loves Christopher Walken hamming it up as Detective McNaughta, and for good reason.
Unfucking believable.
But you gotta admit, when it comes to cinematic believability, Ripper is far from being a slam dunk. In fact, I think the only Hollywood star in Ripper who actually turned in a decent performance was Paul Giamatti, and that's only because he was a relatively unknown actor at the time. Black Dahlia, on the other hand, has world-class solid acting throughout, easily some of the best that the genre had to offer. The compositing and visual effects are also top-notch, while everything was shot on blue screen,
which was the style at the time.
There are a lot of camera movements, which must have been absolute murder for the 3D animators who had to painstakingly match the virtual environments to the camera pans and zooms, and there aren't just 1 or 2 of these like in Pandora Directive, they're fucking everywhere. The visual effects are also really top-notch. I mean, barring the occasionally janky 3D gargoyle, this shot of the environment melting into existence around Pearson is really fucking impressive for 1998. The editing and sound design are also really good, although the music has a tendency to drown out the dialogue, something that Ripper also suffered from, which sometimes makes it very hard to hear what the characters are saying. And of course you can't have subtitles on, unless you install the version 1.01 patch, and even then the subtitles feel like such a bizarre afterthought, because they're not synced to the character's dialogue. In fact, they're literally just a scroll text of the script for that current scene that lugubriously advances one line at a time, regardless of how fast the characters are talking. The gameplay environments are these node-based things like in 7th Guest, where you're basically glued to the floor until you click a "now go here" hotspot, but unlike the 7th Guest, you can examine each node in 360 degrees by holding down the left mouse button and dragging it around. And then there are the puzzles themselves. Oh fucking hell, let's talk about the puzzles. Now, you'd think an 8 CD extravaganza, as the front of the box proudly calls it, with tons of video and an intricate story, would be eager to have as wide an audience as possible to be able to experience all of it and have the design reflect the desire for broad appeal. You would be catastrophically wrong. To say this game is difficult is a vast understatement. It's more difficult than quantum calculus. It's more challenging than microscopic cardiac surgery. It's more brutal than a cartel beating. It's more insidious than the Catholic Inquisition. Don't stop me, I've got a million of these. It's harder than a pedophile at a junior pageant show. Okay, I think I'll stop there. This game suffers from a really bad case of stop syndrome, and I mean really bad. Most of the puzzles you'll come across are logic puzzles, and they are all absurdly difficult, and the game will use any excuse to throw one at you. This guy stashed a puzzle box under his floorboard, which you then have to open through a series of bewildering steps, 14 to be exact. The box then contains a key to his dresser drawer, and the dresser drawer itself is also a logic puzzle where you have to turn the key exactly to match a diagram of lunar eclipses on the wall. So sure, this guy lives in a dilapidated shithole on the top floor of a grimy warehouse in downtown Cleveland, but he somehow has his dresser drawer locked up more tightly than Alice's hairdo. Gotcha. Similarly, this door at the swanky nightclub requires you to press these symbols on the door in a very specific order, and that order is derived from folding this invitation in a very specific manner that also feels like trial and error. I mean, who needs something as sensible as a key when you can just slap the door itself around 8 times in a precise order? Meanwhile, the torso killer himself has apparently rigged the opening mechanism to his secret lair up to these valves that need to be jiggled around until they each reach 30 psi, but of course jiggling one valve causes another valve to jiggle on its own, and yeah, it's the fucking coffin puzzle from 7th Guest all over again. And how the fuck he even managed to rig this shit up in the first place is an excellent question that shall forever remain unanswered, but maybe the Dahlia also grants you the power of advanced engineering degrees in addition to summoning angry Norse gods. Worst of all, this section in the Nazi ruins where you eventually find the gem is hidden behind no less than 4 logic puzzles in quick succession. 1 to open the vault door, and 1 for each of the 3 safes inside the vault. 2 of these safe puzzles are just there to fuck with you because the gem is always hidden inside the 3rd safe you open, meaning that all 3 safe puzzles are mandatory even though 2 of them yield absolutely no results. The worst puzzle by far, though, is this rotating gem puzzle, which will have you scratching your head to the point where you'll leave permanent scars on your scalp, much like Alice's had, because it involves placing a series of runestones into this diamond-shaped wireframe, and there are 24 of these bad boys that must be placed in a very specific order, and oh, runes! My god, did the designers of this game have a fucking hard-on for Norse runes. Look, I'm Danish, my ancestors were Vikings. I live about 10 minutes away from an actual fucking Viking museum that has actual fucking Viking shit in it, and even they don't have as many fucking runes as this game. I guarantee you, you will be absolutely sick of Norse runes by the time you finish this game. Luckily for me, the developers actually included cheat codes to bypass the logic puzzles, which is a real godsend because something like this deceptively innocuous sliding tile puzzle requires no less than 41 moves to complete, and this door puzzle in a dream sequence requires you to navigate 4 confusing topsy-turvy rooms to uncover 15 cryptic messages like "the keys are creatures of the sun," and "if west is the right and east is the left, you know on which side the sun will rise and on which the moon will set," which translates into what order these stones on the sides of the door go in. Fuck that. I will gladly take the L and just type in can on the puzzle screen to just skip this bullshit entirely. But even when you're doing quote-unquote standard adventuring, you're not really doing it in the way you would normally do in an adventure game. Sure, you have an inventory, but most of the items in it are just there so you can inspect them more thoroughly, documents, note scraps, photographs, etc., and occasionally use them on a character to show it to them. In fact, there's only one puzzle in the game that truly feels like a standard use this on that type of puzzle, and of course it's a fucking timer puzzle. I mean, why wouldn't it? To stop the train and distract the conductor, you have to pick up this roll of string, lift this wobbly suitcase onto the truck, and then quickly tie the suitcase to the emergency brake cord. The string only magically appears once you've talked to the conductor, so you have to be extra vigilant and notice that something has inexplicably changed in this room since the last time you passed through it, and even then you have to divine the stretch of logic that the best way to distract the conductor is by mischievously pulling the emergency brake, which seems like an overreaction at best, and will put you drastically behind schedule even though you're already racing to your destination in pursuit of a homicidal madman. It's a pretty duplicitous approach to game design in general, because the game starts you off deceptively light by having you talk to a couple of people, getting to know your environment and your objectives, which all seem fairly straightforward. When I first played this game, I thought this was all it was going to be. I thought it was going to be one of those games where your main objective was to talk to people and maybe do some light room investigations to pick up items and use them on other items like a normal adventure game, but oh no. Phone numbers. I got stuck on phone numbers because... oh my god. Because to be able to call anyone in this game, you have to apply a fucking mathematical equation to the encoded phone numbers, because why would you ever think to just write down the 6 digits of a phone number when you can obfuscate it to the point of unbridled insanity? A phone number in this game is written as 3 letters and 3 numbers. The letters correspond to the letters on the dial, so that one's pretty easy. CMR 140 corresponds to 267140. But at some point you need to realize that these case numbers are in fact coded phone numbers, and to decode them you need to do math. Now let's just run this down, because this is the game's first real gloves off moment, and it comes out swinging. Using the same phone number as above, here's how you solve this based on the case number of that same person. The case number is CLV218411. First, you need to convert the letters to numbers, but you need to somehow figure out that the first letter corresponds to the digit on the phone dial unchanged, so C equals 2, but the second letter needs to be the digit on the phone dial plus 1, meaning L equals 5 plus 1, which equals 6, and the third letter is the digit on the phone dial minus 1, so V equals 8 minus 1, which equals 7. That's just the first 3 digits. Then you've got 21, 84, and 11, which you have to turn into 3 single-digit numbers to complete the 6-digit phone number, and you're supposed to somehow divine that these double-digit numbers are actually subtraction problems, so 21 is actually 2 minus 1, 84 is 8 minus 4, and 11 is 1 minus 1, so you end up with 1, 4, and 0, and thus the complete phone number is now 267140, and holy shit, this is one of the first puzzles in the game. It only gets much, much worse from here on. But here's the thing, right? This game has balls. A lot of FMV games in the 90s were, let's put this mildly, not much of a challenge. Sure, they may have had 1 or 2 head scratchers that would tickle your brain for a bit, but for the most part, they were made so that audiences could marvel at the movie parts and maybe click around the screens a few times in between. Not this game. This game expects you to fucking work for it, and it is not about to let you off light. There are 8 CDs worth of prime storytelling with phenomenal acting and an intriguing plot that veers gleefully between historical accuracy, carefully researched mythology, and wildly imaginative insanity. It's a brilliant story that's also as well crafted as any big-budget Hollywood adventure, and the environments and atmosphere are as finely crafted as a fancy dish at a 5-star restaurant, but they are not just gonna hand it over to you on a silver platter. You have to fight this thing tooth and nail every step of the way to see it to the end, because this game knows it's that good, and like a prom date with a preacher's daughter, it's not about to give up the goods for just anyone. This game has balls. Unfortunately, that may also have been its downfall. The barrier of entry is just so damn high, I'd wager a lot of people going into this thing just gave up at some point because it does not let up. This thing is the adventure game equivalent of a military academy. Some people have the stomach for it, but realistically speaking, most of them don't. I certainly wasn't one of them. I cheated my way through the entire thing, hand on heart. I'm not that smart. But the other thing that may have caused this game to be relegated to near obscurity was the marketing. Because for some reason, the main selling point became the historical aspects of how the team spent countless hours researching the period and the real-life people and events in the story, when in reality that's only maybe half of it, or even less. For some reason, all the gloriously demented stuff about pagan gods and blood sacrifices that would have drawn in audiences was downplayed in favor of making it look like some sort of History Channel affair, and that just boggles my mind. It doesn't help that the front cover of the box tells you next to nothing about what the game actually has to offer. There are some barely visible Norse runes floating around the background, but for the most part it's just some lady floating inexplicably in a blue void. And for the longest time I didn't even realize it was a woman's face until one day I accidentally turned the box upside down. And up until then I thought it was just some poorly rendered 3D face of a scowling dude. Here, see here? If you hold it right side up, her nose kind of looks like the eye of the dude. Here, let me draw you an outline. I mean, you see it, right? So yeah, this game had everything going for it, and yet somehow managed to bury itself with impenetrable puzzle design and bewilderingly lackluster marketing. I can see why this game fell by the wayside, but in spite of all that, and everything I've bitched about so far, I think it's a damn shame that this game isn't remembered more these days. And that's the real reason why I'm making this video. I think this game was one of the last truly great games in a genre that was otherwise dismissed, if not outright ridiculed, by the vast majority of the game-playing public. This game deserved better. I mean, it certainly deserves to be remembered. And sure, it doesn't have Christopher Walken in it, but this game has been living in Ripper's shadow for so long that it's almost been consumed by it, and I say, fuck that. This game is unfucking believable. Now, if you don't believe me and you don't feel like going through hell just to get it running on a modern PC, go check out the 4-hour movie I put together of all the FMV scenes if you just want to experience the story. I mean, seriously, have a movie night, crack a beer every time Pearson makes a confused face. And then if you're suitably interested, go check out the making of mini documentary I put together where I've interviewed the cast and crew. So, well, I'm the Black Dahlia historian, now, apparently. Until next time, I'll see you in Hades and maybe around the Chrono Stream. Bye! They're not exactly getting a whole lot of shit done, except for this man, an old dude with a cane named Dr. Eisenstadt. Sean Connery is now narrating this fucking video. And a slimy FBI agent named Winslow, who is based on every smug band of pond scum. Rhythm and blues in the sewers. As it turns out, after the Dahlia was rudely snatched from Pearson's hand in the Nazi ruins, he has two of them. Even though her character is so undercooked it would send Gordon Ramsay into a foaming Frenchie. Voulez-vous? My hairstyle is so magnificent. After what seems like an eternity of roundabouts and unnecessary... Here, for some reason, he impersonates her hanging from the ceiling, and after Pearson cuts him/her down, he then Shang Tsung's into himself before bringing out the real Alice and having her inexplicably blow her brains out. That's not a good sentence to flub. The visual effects are also really top-notch. I mean, barring the occasionally janky 3D gargoyle, this shot of the environment melting into existence. Because they're not synced to the character's dialogue. In fact, they're literally just a scroll text of the script for that current scene that lugubriously advances one line at a time to... Because they're not synced to the character's dialogue. Or here in the sewers. There's a grate up here that you need to look through, but it's so high up in the frame that the hotspot is literally just a few pixels tall. And that's assuming you notice it's even there in the fucking first place. Why would you fuck the place? Or here in the sewers. There's a grate up here that you need to look through, but it's so high up in the frame that the hotspot is literally just a few pixels tall, and that's assuming you even notice it's even fucking...
Hello? You know what you're doing? You're driving me crazy. All right, let's try it again. Amateurs.